of our community, AM 1310 The Light presents Legally Speaking. Here is today's host.
Good morning, Radio Land. I'd like to thank all the folks that are looking at our show on Facebook, YouTube, especially YouTube people. Make sure you subscribe. Also, Twitter and the 3 station, 92.7, 1310, and 95.7. Thank you all for listening to our show today. I also like to tell you that this is a live call-in show. It's 317-239-1310, 317-239-1310. We have some, as usual, some of the greatest trial lawyers in America, starting with the famous lawyer Milton Grimes out of LA, who led the modern day civil rights litigation representation of Rodney King. And then we have Vanita Banks, one of the top trial lawyers. She's cybersecurity, masters in tax, which is wonderful to have such an outstanding cast of attorneys with us today. Good morning, counsel. How are you guys doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning, Attorney Lee. How are you?
Great. Well, here's the issue. Last week we were talking about the shooting, and as you know, this week, Derek Chauvin, the murderer of George Floyd, was indicted along with the co-conspirator police officers in federal court for civil rights violation. Since the Screws case in 1945, I've not seen many cases in America where the police officers who watch or witness a criminal offense were also indicted for the killing of another human being. So I think that that represents a radical departure in terms of what our justice system would do. And I think that sends a strong message that if you witness someone being killed by your fellow officers, you could be held liable. So I think that's a very positive sign. What do you think, Milton?
Well, the Screws case is one of my favorite cases in history in the past, with what happened to that police chief of that little town, who he and his 2 deputies beat this young man to death because he wanted to assert his right to own a gun. And it was, anyway, that they eventually were found not guilty in the second trial, Nate, those defendants in the Screws case. I am optimistic that we're going to experience some change as a result of the George Floyd case, but I'm also pragmatic, I think, in that I recognize in the 25 plus years since Rodney King, little has changed. Little has changed. We remove an officer, we'll remove a police chief, as they did in the aftermath of the civil disorder in Los Angeles in 1992, and changes were made. But the culture and the mentality of the officers stayed the same. And when you look at training that exists throughout the country and in different police departments, you can understand that. Like in Kentucky, back some 8 years ago, they were training state police with Hitler and Robert E. Lee, General Lee, slogans and statements and philosophy, and training them to look at people as almost like enemy combatants, not as citizens. So what do I think? I think we got to fight on our hands, and we got to fight even more and use Floyd as one of the foundations for that fight. But it's not going to go away without the continued fight. And when I say fight, I don't want it to be inferred that I'm talking about an actual physical fight, literal fight. But we have to stand our ground and take a position and move forward on demanding that these officers cease and desist and stop killing third world and people of color.
Attorney Banks?
This indictment coming less than a month after the murder of George Floyd, indicting both Chauvin and the three other officers on grounds that they deprived Floyd of his civil rights during the arrest, sends a strong signal of our nation's Justice Department's priority. And it is a reflection, at least, of the next step towards accountability. And the indictment states that Chauvin violated George Floyd's civil rights when kneeling on him and denying him the right to be free from the use of unreasonable force by a police officer. And the officers that stood by also willfully failed to intervene to stop Chauvin. This is unprecedented, at least in my view. I haven't seen anything quite like this in a very, very long time. What about you, Milton?
Well, Vanita, I'm glad you brought that up. In the Rodney King case, there were 27 officers there that night that he was beat for 1 minute and 19 seconds. He was beaten by a baton by 2 officers while Sergeant Kuhn administered the intervals of the taser on him. And those 23 other officers, aside from Kuhn, Wynn, Basino, and Powell, they were the 4 officers that were on him. The 23 other officers surrounded the car, surrounded the area where the beating was occurring. And on occasion, it looked like the officers were looking off to the side and saying, yeah, get me cream and sugar in my coffee. They were not afraid. They had no fear of Rodney King. And I thought then the other 23 officers should have been charged. That indictment by the federal Justice Department, in that case, they indicted those 4 officers after the Simi Valley trial, after they were found not guilty in Simi Valley, and only 2 of the 4, Kuhn and Powell, were found guilty. The other 2 were found not guilty, even in the federal trial. But in answering your question straightforward, I believe your duty to protect and serve also exists for you to stop and intervene to protect a person from a police officer. So I'm glad to see the Justice Department moving forward, even though it's a snail pace. It is definitely a movement forward to indict these 4 officers, and I'm appreciative of that. I only say, please, let's not let the world and law enforcement forget George Floyd and go back to the things that used to happen. We just got to keep the pressure on.
Well, the threshold legal question, though, that resonates when we watched the Chauvin trial, there were a number of witnesses said, I wish I could have done more, and they felt remorse. But in analyzing the situation as citizens, what do we do? You know, Milton, you got Vanita, you got guys with guns, tasers, and backup to shoot and kill you. So you watch a police basically killing another human being. First, you had a relative, and then maybe non-relative. What do you do? What can you do as a citizen other than videotape it?
I saw that picture in the paper this morning, reading the paper where they were talking about the indictment of the 4 officers, and it showed a picture from a distance of the 3 officers on Floyd's body and the 4th officer standing there watching the action. And I wondered, what do I do? If I'm a person driving by or walking by, what do I do? Do I take a picture? Do I film? Do I yell? Do I use my voice? Do I do something to distract? Do I throw some water on them? Do I get a fire hose? Or if I got a gun in my car, do I use it? If it's a relative, I honestly think, and I'm not trying to be Rambo or anything, I honestly think that I'm committed to dying for my loved one, especially a child. I hope that that never comes to any tests. if it's a stranger or human, another person, I do believe I'm compelled to do something, If it's nothing but throw a trash can top or yell or do something to let them know you got to stop. But I don't know. It's an awful thing to face. You know, I've been close to that a few times, but never involved in something that serious. I don't know what
Of course, I would video. That's incredibly important, as we know. And I think the model really in that situation is what we saw of the community, those that were watching. We saw the 17-year-old take the video. We saw people speaking out to the police officers, begging them, telling them that you are killing George Floyd. You know, I would have to adamantly tell the police officers, stop. And if it was a family member, of course, and even not, my good Samaritan instincts would kick in. I would think of calling 911, anything that I could do to disrupt what we saw. But it is just an unimaginable situation and scenario that none of us probably would know exactly what we would do. And the crowd did as much as they could, although the defense tried to discredit them. It was clear that they were not a threat, and that many of the community members were saying, please stop.
Well, I think, Vanita, you're right. And I'm not condemning or criticizing what was done, but it was 9 minutes and 26 seconds.
Yes.
And ended up dead. So I do believe we have a right to defend ourselves, even in the face of a assault by a police officer. Am I right or wrong, Nathaniel?
Well, what it is that most states have right to use force in defense of a third person. So, but the problem we have is that there's a conflict in the law. Defense of a third person give a person the right to shoot and kill somebody who's been shot and killed by someone else. But it's a radical departure when dealing with law enforcement, because in theory, the law enforcement at that point in time is the law. They're supposed to be the protector of the law and the preservation of human life. So it's a strange paradox. And I think that one of the things that we have to address, particularly in federal legislation, is, and instead of also getting rid of qualified immunity, they need to look at this more carefully. What rights do a citizen have when they know that the police officer is involved in a crime? The citizens don't have any recourse currently because they intervene. They could be arrested and they could be shot and killed themselves. So there's cases after case. Now, there's one thing that we need to know for certain. Each year in America, particularly in the last 4 years, we've had over 1,000 folks been shot and killed by police officers. So that's average about 3 per day. And 30% of those are African Americans. We're 13.4% of the population, but we're 30% of the people that are shot and killed by police officers. And there's a high amount of Blacks that are shot and killed by police officers when they're not armed. And so you see case after case like that. And so even though it's a theoretical discussion, but in real life situation, this is happening every day somewhere in America. And so we need to take a close look at this, because we pay money for police officers to protect us, to serve, to be a model for the community, but we're in dangerous territory, because now we see that on a regular basis that they're crossing the line too much. There are a lot of great police officers out there, but there's just too many of these senseless killings.
Nate, you eloquently said that. And what I come away from what you said is then I have to stand back and watch a person, loved one, friend, neighbor, stranger, to be executed by a police officer, and I have to stand with my arms folded and only assert a verbal command or statement. I cannot intervene. I do not believe that is the state of the law. It is scary to go the next step, to use some force against the officer, but I would interpret the present law, which allows me to defend or protect someone who is being wrongfully attacked by law enforcement or another person. And Vanita said earlier, her good Samaritan instincts would come out. Well, my good Samaritan instincts and my love and my fear for my fellow man tells me to do something. And I think that, and I'm not trying to instigate or promote violence, but I think that if anybody is killing another human being, we have a right to intervene. And I'm saying that as gently as I can.
And we see every day.
Let's take one quick call. I want to comment on this. Well, Frank, you have a question or observation for our show today?
Yes, sir, I do. And thank you. But I did intervene with a young man in a young man's life at one time, and on the job, and he hadn't did anything, but the sheriff called on him, and they get ready to they wanted to lock him up, but he refused. He did refuse to obey, but took it the other way around, and stuff like that, and then they called me, and I went out there. By the time I got out there, they get ready. One of them pulled his gun out and told everybody else to get back. And I said, no, you don't have to do that. So, and I walked straight to the young man. I told him, I said, listen, I said, you just go ahead and let them put the handcuffs on you and keep your mouth shut and don't say nothing and get in the car and everything. And I stood there until they did that, until they drove away with him. But you can do it, but you got to be careful when you do it. I put it that way. Because he could have got me for interfering in their that charge could have come up, interfering in their activity, what they were trying to do, but they didn't do it. And but anyway, I just want to say,
Frank, there's one thing you need to know, Frank, that's I think is important. And here's what happened: when you see something like that, you got to get the person's name and their phone number from that person so you can follow up and talk to them. Because see, in other words, when they get arrested, they won't know who you are as being a witness, right? So you have to take that one additional step, say, okay, what is your name? What is your phone number? What is your mom's number so I can reach them? Just ask the person, write it down, because in too many situations, when people are falsely arrested or subject to improper misconduct, the witnesses disappear. So it's just not enough that you take a video of it, but they don't know who you are, and you won't know who they are. That makes sense?
Right. I agree. But here's what done happened over the years with police. With the majority going along with them when they kill people of a color and stuff like that and getting away with it without being charged or anything, it became a right to those police officers. They have a right to do what they do, and you don't have anything to say about it. And that's what done happened here. But now, since electronics didn't come out, and we got proof that you did wrong here, and you had other people standing by watching it. But thanks to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. Now, if there ever been another Attorney General up there besides of him, that charge against them officers would never came if it hadn't been for Merrick Garland. And now you can see why the Republicans didn't want him being on the Supreme Court. Thank you, sir.
Well, that's a good observation, but one thing you need to know, Frank, they blocked about 180 Obama appointees to the appellate court, the district court, and the Supreme Court. So they blocked all of his judicial nominees. And so the net result is that about a third of the federal judges now are people that were appointed by Trump. They took away all criteria for appointment. The qualification experience didn't mean anything. They said that we're going to populate the court with people that believe in our ideology versus skill set. And that's a radical departure of what the federal system should be. The federal judges should be apolitical. They should not be involved in the political process. And so we had Ms. McConnell, they were hell-bent on putting judges that had a political ideology that was consistent with their view. And that result is that that's not what a democracy is all about, because we give these judges lifetime appointments. And now let's take one more caller. Dietrich, you have a comment for us today, sir, before we take a break. Hello, Dietrich? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, what's your comment and your question for us today?
Okay, so my whole thing is I had some experiences with some IPD police. I was at the Willard's Mission, and that was called because I wanted a ticket to get something to eat. Cop came. He came, and a young guy, younger than me, pushed me to the door onto the pavement. I got up, and I looked at his license plates. And me being young and growing as a young man, I said, I'm going down to the solid complaint on you. He grabbed the CB. I'm looking at him through the back of his window. He grabs the CB, calls. By the time it used to be Burger King on Ohio and Delaware. By the time I'm not playing, by the time I got to Delaware, about 9 cops pulled up the squad cars, jumped out. I had my book bag. I was a student at Ivy Tech then. They surrounded me, but I made it to the thing. But I found the complaint, and let me see, I gave the descriptions, the badge numbers, and it was about 7 or 8 of them. They signed the complaint, and I believe they got fired. But my whole thing is this: that 45 guy, that Trump guy, he enhanced this hate, And even though, our ancestors was brought over here without their will, but we supposed to try to live and get along with each other. But the change is going to have to come in the laws. You guys just got this conversation going, people in Indianapolis, people across the world. We have to change the law. So that's what they're going by, documentation, and they're going by the law. So my whole thing is, what do? We do got to stand our ground, but at the same time, we don't want to shed blood and innocent lives because some certain groups of people have hate towards people that look like me. So there's a lot of work needs to be done, a lot of praying has to be done, and it's so sad that it's 2021 that these groups of people that's out in the woods, the Klan, the white supremacists, they need to find something that's better to do because we are going to win this battle with them or without them because God is looking down and God dwells in us. So the legislation and the laws, actually, they go by documentation. And if all these judges and these other people that got this biases, locking all colored people up to look like me, it just has to be in the law. We have to get them, vote them out, and have somebody in there that got common sense and got a good heart and a good mind because we want to live. We don't want to die. And we want to stop this this stereotype and this driving while black, especially in Indiana. Jesus Christ. Thank you for taking my call.
Wow. That was a boatload, Attorney Banks. That may be something you could replicate in your neck of the woods even. He's saying driving while blacks and things like that. He brought a lot of issues. What do you think?
Absolutely. The caller made so many outstanding points. We have seen African-American men and boys and women and girls get killed for talking too loud, playing their music too loud, playing in the park, jogging, sleeping in their own bed, putting their hands up in response to a police officer's command to do so. And we know that we have approximately 18,000 police departments across the United States. And there is no consistency in the application of, what is reasonable force under the circumstances. We've talked on last week's show about specific killings that occurred, and I believe there's been at least 6 killings. So there doesn't appear to be any deterrent effect on police departments based on what the world witnessed 9 minutes, 29 seconds with Officer Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, which means that we have to have a national standard. And we need to pass, and the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And every citizen that is hearing my voice today, please contact your senators, your state senators, and demand that they move forward with passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It would eliminate qualified immunity, which we talked about, ban the kind of chokeholds that we witnessed in George Floyd's killing, no-knock warrants, which resulted in Breonna Taylor's death. It would establish a national database, which would include officers that have been, abusive in one state that now can move to another state and join another police department. It would require training, including the psychological testing, and funds for municipalities and cities to reimagine their police departments. We need really massive reform in this space, and the national standard that is articulated in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is the next step for addressing this systemic problem.
Well, I agree that we have to have some federal legislation to address this. This is an urgent issue. And one of the things that I think is equal important is that I've been working on this police process here in Indianapolis for a long time. And what upset me most is that I'm a big supporter of our local political leaders, but on this issue of qualified immunity, our city, the city of Indianapolis, have the worst qualified immunity ruling in the country. Indianapolis advocated qualified immunity for some officers who tortured Terrell Day at 10th and Mid-Offer. It was just shocking to me that they were able to get away with that. And when I watch these shooting and killing here in the city, most people don't know that we are one of the instrumentality that allows that, because our laws allow them to kill citizens and they get away with it. And so hopefully the Justice Department take a look at some of these cases and see whether or not these officers can be held accountable, because under our federal system, the civil cases, they let them go scot-free. And that's not a deterrence. If you know that you can kill another human being, there's no consequences, I just think that that's just wrong. And we need to try to work hard as citizens to correct that flaw. So when you see your mayor just asking about Terrell Day and his qualified immunity, because they be speaking about this, but they've avoided this issue. See, we need to make sure that our local state politicians are on board. It's not just U.S. citizens, because the qualified immunity, even though you need federal legislation, but it's involved with each police force in your city and your state. So it's not just a federal thing, it's a local thing also, because your local authorities can agree that they did not invoke this qualified immunity. They could get rid of it, but they don't, because they protect the people who are committing crimes, and that's just wrong. And so in Milton and LA, what, if anything, have you done in your neck of the wood in terms of qualified immunity? Are they advocating that, or did your city council vote to get rid of it?
The city council has not voted to get rid of it. It's still a fight, even though the West Virginia judge said this has got to stop in that case last summer, the Jones case, I think it was, Nate.
Yeah.
Oh God, guys, I see the fire come out and I'm going, yeah. And then it goes back to the, as usual, again. So that's why I say I'm just, you know, guys, we got to keep pushing. We can't take our foot off of the pedal. Got to keep fighting this thing. It's not going to go away overnight. It hasn't gone away over 30 years since Rodney King's beating. It's a fight ahead of us. That's the only thing I can say, Nathaniel.
Well, Attorney Banks, one of the things I observed is that up there in Chicago, Democratic Mayor Laura Lightfoot, they say secretly she was behind the scene advocating qualified immunity. And in my mind, there is not a more corrupt police department on the planet than the Chicago Police Department. That's just my personal observation of things that I've seen and observed through depositions. I've taken a bunch of deposition up there, and it was just, to me, widespread corruption. And I just—
That was in the days of old, wasn't it, Nate? That doesn't happen today, does it?
That's every day. And one of the problems is, and here's the biggest problem I had. We had a case, let me see, which case was this? It'll come to me in a second. But a young man was shot by a police officer through his right hand. He had surrendered, he got shot through his hand. And so the police department, they shot him when he was down on the ground, and it was just a mix-up. The young man thought that the police officers were gangbangers. He had had an encounter a few days earlier with some gangbangers in his neighborhood. They were speeding, and he said something to them, say, "Hey, you guys gonna kill some kids, man, slow it down." They got upset at him because he simply told the gangbangers that you drive too fast and he was gonna report them. Well, he then went into hiding, thinking that the gangbanger is going to retaliate. Well, he's at a gas station getting drinks when he see what he think are the gangbangers in a similar looking vehicle come up. And then when that occurred, he started running. And then the guy got out the SUV and shot at him. He shot at this guy. So he runs, and then so he runs about a half a mile, and then he hears police cars. He said, "Thank God, there's police officers." So then he lays down on the ground and let the officer know that he was there, and he puts his hands up. Police come in and shoot him. He shot him. And they arrested him for, assault on an officer. I mean, it's crazy stuff, right? Well, the problem with these cases is in Chicago, they don't do forensic correctly. And so unless you get a video to show the whole thing, they get away with it. And that's why that LaShawn McDonald case was so incredible, because that represented a radical departure in terms of policing in Chicago. And so it's one of those things whereby it just galled me that they do things like that and got away with it. And so you can't do a whole lot about it because they hold the evidence close to the vest. And so you don't get to see the evidence. And we've had that happen here in the city. In my Tyson case, the police officer held all the evidence for about 9 months. So by the time you get the evidence, it's manufactured evidence. And I see that they're doing a similar type matter in this case in North Carolina, where they refuse to release all the video footage. Well, when they're doing that, evidence don't change, folks. Don't change whether you release it today or next day, unless you're trying to conceal something or alter it. And that's what always troubled me, because, we had the shooting here in Indianapolis at FedEx, and the FedEx people hadn't released the video footage of the shooting. I represent 4 of the victims. Well, since the guy who did the homicide is dead, why wouldn't FedEx release the video footage to lawyers as to what happened? And since you can't prosecute anybody because he's dead. And so you see this over and over again. And one of the reasons why FedEx didn't do that is that FedEx put armed guards to guard cargo, but no guards at the time to guard human beings. And that may be what they're trying to embarrass about, but that's one situation.
While you were talking, I thought of being a little bit teasing of Vanita and say, Vanita, Nate is telling you in Chicago, you need, when you go walking, you should walk with your camera in your hand, your phone in your hand, so that you can video. But
well, I always walk with my camera in my hand so that I can video.
I was going to.
And is pepper spray, is that illegal to carry? I always have my mace in my pocket. Hopefully, I didn't say anything that would result in me getting stopped when I'm walking in the park.
Yeah, but sadly, oh God, you talk about qualified immunity and what happens. Nate, I've seen cases in the last 5 years. I've been involved in 3 cases in the last 5 years where the video clearly showed the misconduct in the shooting of a person running away, the shooting of a woman with her hands behind her back, and the officer threatening to shoot her, that if you don't stop resisting, I'm going to JPX you. And she said, what's that? And he pulls it up and just shoots inside the head, and he lies about it. They lie about it because they feel that one juror is so strongly supportive of police that they will not find them guilty, even in the face of video evidence to the contrary of what they're saying. If I hadn't witnessed this in my own experience, I wouldn't believe it. And I know it's hard for a lot of people to believe, but there are people out here that is just so emphatically supportive of the police or hate minorities so much, they're not going to find them guilty no matter what the evidence say. I've seen that with my own eyes and experience.
Great. Okay, Trey, you have a comment for us today, sir.
Hey, how's it going, y'all? Yeah, I just wanted to ask, would it be possible if we followed COVID guidelines that you come and do a talk like
Hey,
this?
Trey, you need to speak up a little bit. Your voice is dying out. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, I wanted to call in and ask, would it be possible if we followed COVID guidelines that you could come out and do this talk like once a month if it was an organized like thing, not a bunch of promotion, but what you guys are talking about is great. And I think it doesn't reach, it reaches a lot of people on social media, but it needs to reach like a lot more. And I just wonder if that's something that would be possible.
Well, what we're doing now, Trey, is that we're broadcasting live on YouTube, right? And so people can, you know, if you broadcast, just let them know, and you can take it and copy it and send it to YouTube and let all your friends know they can watch the show on YouTube. And we do it twice a month now. Also, we're on Facebook, on Nathaniel Lee Facebook, and we're on 3 radio stations here locally. And 4th, we're on the internet. So they could go anywhere in the world and listen to the show on the internet. We're on 3 local radio stations. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, and then we'll also post this on Twitter. But I agree with you that this issue of policing is important. And here's why. Nothing affects us more than policing in our community, whether it's good or bad or otherwise. We see in our community, we have upshoot in criminal activity, so we do need the police to serve and protect from people who commit violent crimes. On the other hand, we don't want the police officer then to become a judge, jury, and executioner. So we want to have smart, intelligent policing. We want them to take their oath seriously, that is to serve and protect, that we want them to be model citizens, just like we expect for other people to be. And so, you know, we do need policing. You know, I've never been a proponent to say get rid of police officers, but on the other hand, we don't want bad policing. That's just bad for us. And one of the things, though, we need to also do, Trey, is that we need to get more people out of the community, particularly African Americans, to apply to be police officers. Across the country, there's a shortage of Black males, particularly being police officers. there's certainly a bigger shortage of black females, particularly black males. And the reason that's important is that there's a 6-to-1 probability of a black male being shot by a police officer unarmed than anybody else. And so that's why we need to make sure that we're represented on these departments on a regular basis. Now, Milton, in your city, what is the demographic? Do you have a pro rata representation of black officers on your department?
Ooh, why would you ask me that question? Because I'm not exactly sure and I don't want to lie, but there is a shortage of them for sure. I've read recently about that. It's tough to recruit African Americans to be police officers because of the severe distress of police. It's not an attractive profession. And so you can count on when an officer comes, they're usually going to be either white or Hispanic or Asian in our own neighborhood. So I don't know the numbers, John. I don't know the numbers.
See. What about in your experience, Attorney Banks?
I'm not exactly sure. I do know that we have a black police chief, and I do also know that reportedly, back to the question of qualified immunity, that it has been reported that Mayor Lightfoot was quietly lobbying against efforts to end qualified immunity, but we also know that it has been reported as well that civil lawsuits stemming from police misconduct has resulted in the city of Chicago paying more than $500 million since 2009. And it's been reported, at least, that individual police officers have been responsible for paying $2 million in settlements. And as you know, Chicago had been under pursuant to a federal pattern and practice investigation of its police department, had entered into a consent decree. And recently, Governor Pritzker had signed a law, a criminal justice reform bill that he signed in February, which specifically established a task force to review and reform qualified immunity in the state of Illinois. So much more to follow.
Okay, let's take another caller. I know we got a lot of people waiting to get in on the conversation. So, Guy, you have a question and comment for us today. Hello?
Hear me, Nate?
Yes, sir.
Great discussion. Kudos to your panelists. I think this is a problem that has been around for a long time, as we know. I think we have to look at new strategies, and one would be make sure when we talk about qualified immunity, those kinds of phrases, that we don't generalize so much, because I think it's a case where we have to not put the police against the community, but we have to put the community against the bad police actions. And as you know, with any profession, a lot of times the new recruits come in with an idea, they're idealistic about service and so forth, but a lot of times that's taken away from them in terms of business as usual. And I don't think we can go along with business as usual as it's been done in the past. I think we have to try to develop strategies to put the policemen that want to do the right thing against the policemen that don't want to do the right thing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I follow you, Guy.
And another thing,
you know, it's not so much the police actions against the community that is the subject. I think it's police different treatment for different groups.
Has there been a guest in yet live?
Beg pardon?
Yeah. I didn't hear the last sentence, Guy.
I think we have to look at the disparity in treatment by the police to different groups of people in the community, because the general community is treated a certain way, whereas people of color are treated another way. And I think this is what we need to target.
Okay, excellent point. Thank you very much. Now let's go to our next caller. We'll come back there in a second. Let's get one more caller, then we'll get Milton. Okay, Jay, you have a comment for us today.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I have watched the police for years. I was born in the 50s, middle 50s, and they have always done what they have done, and I'm grateful that we are standing up now. Now, my only real encounter with the police was when my 16-year-old son took me out of my own house, held me and so forth, and shook me as I was his child. When the police came, the police was trying to tell me to shut up. I guess since I didn't, because I do have a mouth, I was trying to let him know that I'm the mother and he's my son. They knocked me on the ground. I had a concussion and everything. Black police and a white police, but the white one knocked me down. The black one stood there and grabbed my sons who were ready to defend me at that time. Too late. But I went to the Fraternal Order of Police, which was a black man, Rita, and he believed the police. I didn't get anything done. Then my son, who was in an altercation with the police, he was bit by the dog, beat with the baton, snatched out of his truck. They said he had a no trespass, and that really wasn't true. And they broke his phone because he was recording. In my house at 2 o'clock in the morning, I got the recording on our Marco Polo with him howling and getting bit by dogs. But nothing was done.
How long ago did this happen, ma'am? Wait a second. When did this happen in the last couple of years? Or has it been longer than 2 years?
Yeah, they told him it is too late for him to file a charge, too. That was Lawrence police that did all of this.
No, I'm saying this happened within the last 2 years, or it been longer than 2 years?
Mine, the one with the police knocked me down as the mother of a 16-year-old, that's been a while back. But the one where my son, within the last 2 years, they told him it was nothing they could do at this time.
Well, you can still
they get away
sue.
with murder, and I don't understand, sir, why black men don't go out to be police. It's better than being on the corner selling drugs. And, you know, black men today have little stand. Let them stand 10 toes down and rest and help their own community instead of doing things like beating their women. Some of them, not all of them. I had a man that didn't stand for me. He was my man for 7 years, but when I got in trouble with a certain somebody, he did not stand, and he's a pastor. So I am a little perturbed, but, you know, traumatized in a sense, but I still have joy in my soul because God keeps me, and if you see me, you'll see that he keeps me, and I'm beautiful in him.
Okay, well, thank you very much, but thank you. Go ahead, Milton.
To answer your earlier question, I just quickly looked it up on the internet. It's 9.6% African-American police in Los Angeles. It's roughly 900 and some African-American police officers. So that's 1 out of 10 police officers. But when you're patrolling a predominantly African-American neighborhood, it would be nice if, for lack of a better word, if there was more presence of African-Americans as police.
Okay. Okay, Vanita, we got a minute left. Your final comment?
Because even though there can be bad African-American cops, I think there's more empathy still, people to people.
I represent a lot of black officers, and they are good guys. They protect and serve. And rarely, if ever, I've not had a single client on the police officer that actually shot another person. You know, for the most part, they're out there protecting and serving. They're doing a good job.
Right.
Vanita? Attorney Banks?
Well, I think that at this juncture, we have to focus on solutions. And I think that federal legislation is one of those steps toward solution. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we're also seeing other states and we're seeing states and municipalities address this issue as well. The mayor in Utica, New York, for example, has established a public safety department as opposed to a police department. Some cities are dismantling their police departments and reimagining policing and focusing more on prevention and, of course, protection. And so a shift away from the militaristic policing, and we need to evolve in our communities to the protection and serve model.
Well, thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to thank our audience, our YouTube, and my special outstanding superstar panel of guests. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being pillars in your community. And the callers and the viewers, I'd like to thank every one of you. And also, don't forget, if you see something, say something, but videotape it. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.